Hey, this is Jose Galison of No Way Jose. You can find me on the No Way Jose YouTube channel. You can also find me just about everywhere podcasts are at, all the major podcatchers. Today, my guests are Andrew of Popular Liberty and Ace. Today's his birthday, so I mean, this won't be when this drops unless you're a Patreon. And with that, patreon.com/says No Way Jose 2020. I like money. Give me money. As always, go check out TopLobsta at toplobsta.com. He has a lot of dope merch. I don't know if you guys saw. For my Dave episode, he made a dope ass like Murray Rothbard Dave Smith mashup, and he used that for my thumbnail for my episode. And now he's made merch for it, so that should be dropping soon too. I'll be getting that one for sure. There's No Way Jose merch there as well. With that, yeah, let's like I said, I have Pops and Ace today, and I just kind of figured we'd touch on archotropism a little bit more and have critique it because it kind of works out popular. Pops, I'm going to keep calling Pops because the Popular Liberty thing throws me off. It doesn't roll off the tongue well. Pops and Ace, and they're kind of like the resident autists of the Liberty movement. So I figured I'd have them kind of build up Pops' theory a little bit more. Not necessarily shoot it down, but kind of build it up. And me, I'm kind of I guess I have a little bit different perspective. I'm kind of the retard out, but I kind of moderate the conversation a little bit, do what I can. With that, let's go to bring these dudes the fuck in. What's up, guys?
Howdy, y'all.
Thank you so much for inviting me back or inviting me on.
Yeah, no problem. Is there a warrant out for your arrest right now after the murder of Brad Palumbo?
Not yet, but maybe one day. One day.
Yeah. Did you agree with me? I don't want to talk trash at all, but did that just the whole thing came off as a it's a argument from a conclusion fallacy or consequence fallacy. The whole argument
slippery
was,
slope fallacy.
Yeah, or that too. It's like the whole argument was, but if that's true, then government's bad. So that can't be true.
Yeah.
And obviously that's very much simplifying it, but it's kind of like he wouldn't accept the premise because then he has to change his mind on a different premise. It was like, well, that doesn't make a difference here. I don't know, not to go off on tangent, but I that was what the whole discussion kind of boiled down to me.
Yeah, I mean, I give props to Brad for doing the debate at all. You know what I mean? But that's sort of my viewpoint as well. I just found it was sort of his argument was just sort of, as you said, an argument from consequence, where it's like, well, bad things could happen, but I don't think that was necessarily the resolution that we were debating on.
Yeah. All right, you guys want to introduce yourselves for those who don't know? You can go ahead, Pops. That way, since you've been kind of sitting out so far.
Pops is fine. Yeah,
Pops,
Andrew from Popular Liberty. I'm the author of the Archotropism Framework and the Anti-Tax, and I think we're going to be talking about that tonight. So.
Mm-hmm. And you are?
I am Ace_Archist on Twitter, and I'm just a Twitter person. I don't know. That's all.
Yeah, no, I mean, you're one of the best among us, though.
I appreciate that.
It's quite. I know. I always joke that, like, for anyone listening, if you're on Twitter, Ace is always a tag away. Because I'm more of the I do not use Twitter as a platform for debates. If I want to do that, I'd go back to Facebook. But sure. Ace has the patience to. There's something magical about someone who has the time and patience and intelligence to do that. And I don't, so I usually just like you Chad meme them or ignore them, and that's about it. Like I intentionally don't. I mean, I will literally send the meme that's like, no, I will not explain myself.
Right. I mean, that's a smart strategy, so I can't complain with that.
And then I will I will literally set traps where I tag Ace, hoping someone comes in. That way, I could just back away and watch the mayhem. Okay, Pops, let's fucking get into it. Go ahead and give us an elevator pitch, kind of like a 5-minute. I know it's super lengthy, it's kind of hard to do, but just kind of a quick of what archotropism is. We've done an episode on this, by the way, so for those who are interested in a longer explanation, I have mine. You've been on Pete Quinones' show, you've been on just about goddamn everywhere, you've been on Mark Claire's show, you've been everywhere giving your spiel, and I feel like it's one of those things you do need to kind of unpack, you need to digest it in long form, and it actually is helpful. I know it's like I'm giving people like a 10-hour chore, but it's like I do think it is a interesting theory, and there's a lot to be drawn from it, and I do think it would behoove you to take it from different sources, because I think you're going to get something different out of my episode as you will with Pete's, but both are valuable.
I try to do every talk a little different to give everybody an incentive to continue listening rather than they heard it once and they don't want to see anybody else's show, but I intentionally do all of my talks differently using different examples and different explanations in order to try to give people extra incentive to see it again and again, because it really does help. It builds on itself pretty quick.
And that's a common trope in theory in general. If you're once you start noticing this in theory, you'll notice that, like, I don't know, say like Rothbard will like explain the same thing 5 different ways so that you can understand it, and then he'll get to his conclusion or whatever. It's a very common thing in theory. Philosophers do this all the time. Explain it 12 different ways, and it's kind of important because we're kind of retarded as humans, and it takes a bunch of different ways to get it into your head because we're not as logical as we think we are. So with that, go ahead, Pops. Go ahead and give us a quick little definition, best you can. But I highly suggest going in the long form for those listening now.
Yeah, Archotropism, put simply, is the process by which the state grows its power through extracting order from chaos. And I also use it kind of colloquially to refer to the 6 laws that I have of Archotropism that basically define the movement of the value of power. And you'll see that they're kind of a mixture of Misesian economics and praxeology and thermodynamics. And and so all I'm trying to do there is define that power has value, and here's how that value behaves.
Okay.
Well, I mean, do you have any critiques at this point, Ace, or no?
No. Oh, no, not at all. I completely agree with that. Yeah.
Because I know. I don't know. Do you guys recall? I don't know if I gave a caveat or gave a little story at the beginning that I didn't. No, we did in the pre. For those watching, this all started because someone tagged me because you two were arguing on Twitter, and I was super busy at the moment. They were like, "You should have them on to talk about this," and I was like, "You guys want to?" They're like, "Okay," and I was like, "Well, I'll just check later. I'm sure they'll remember."
Yeah.
And then I hit you guys up a few days ago. So what were you guys arguing about? No idea.
No idea.
Yeah, I think it just had to do with the clarification of terms. I think, So I think that was the main disagreement.
Yeah, which I think was about Archotropism. I thought
not specifically.
Else.
Oh no, it wasn't.
I thought we ended up agreeing on it too.
We did. Yeah, we
Whatever it was, we agreed on it at the end.
Yeah.
So it's semantics, and that's kind of how it was. I mean, I know me and you, Pops, in our episode, we kind of talked to Archotropism, and there were some minor semantics that I had issues with, but then it kind of like got ironed out. I mean, I mean, some things. I mean, maybe it's just a matter of style. So to me, it comes off as clunky in some parts, but to some other people, maybe not. But yeah, it really is just minor semantic things I have issue. I don't really have any issues with this. I guess Ace doesn't. So let's move on to the implications. And I know this is a whole other episode by itself, but let's get into that. And I kind of want to get into, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're kind of wanting to use the state and not in this like way that where we talk about with the LPMC, where they're like, oh, we're going to use it to for messaging or whatever. Like, no, you want to use the state. So go ahead.
Amongst other things, I would say for that implication comes from the first law that, okay, if you have aggression and that has an inevitable value to it, because I can take your shit, that has value to me, and that's basically inevitable. And if you have hierarchy too, because that's a economic process to make production more efficient, so you have aggression and hierarchy that are both they both have value, therefore they're both going to be inevitably done to profit maximum, because that we're lazy monkeys, we want to get the most bang for our buck. We want to have or as Rothbard put it in Man, Economy and State, we want to have the most ends for like the least means. And so that you're going to have a high because of that you're going to have a hierarchy for aggression, and the size of that hierarchy is going to depend on where the profit maximum for aggression is, and and that can also be balanced over time. So the way I see it is, okay, you have the state, the state is inevitable, and we need to probably do something about that, and because I think there's something that demands to be done for that. And I think that's the point where up to the point where we would agree. And that where we go from there is, okay, well, what do we do about that? And I turn to the the third law and say, okay, well, if the value of power is not just inevitable, it's not just relative, it's also subjective. Well, then it's also subject to time preference, and it works the same way that money does. And if I can manage to and that means that one of the predators, or who are or statesmen as we call them, elected representatives, they can have they all have a time preference for power, and all I have to do to buy my freedom is trade them something that is more valuable to them, usually in terms of power. And we've seen this done repeatedly, like with like tax cuts and marijuana legalization, where we will trade them paying less taxes right now for more in the future, or we will trade them a 25% tax increase right now for the right to smoke a blunt and not be put in a cage. And so I would say if I'm going to be buying my freedom from them, if they're willing, if my freedom is for sale, I mean, maybe it's worth paying the ransom. Because that's the way I see it. I mean, it's a ransom payment. That's effectively the method I'm talking about right now. Is we need a way to lobby for we need a ransom fund so we can lobby for our freedom.
Could you be maybe a little more clear on what you mean by that, or maybe explain a different way from my dumb monkey brain?
Yeah. Okay. So like the I mean, you have to make it a win-win situation where they feel like they're getting more power for for interns for giving us our freedom back. So if I were to make them a let's say that I could legally bribe them. I can't, but let's say I legally could, and not just donating to their campaign, like physically pay them the money for their own personal benefit. Let's say I could legally do that, but I can't. And so the what I would do is say, all right, let me pay you like 10 years of taxes up front right now, and and in return, I'm free and clear of all of your laws, and I am my own statement. I'm my own statesman now. I'm a state unto myself, and something like that. Where it's it's like, okay, well, just what's the price? Because all we're doing is negotiating. Now that you've told me that my freedom is for sale, so long as I give you the power or wealth that you desire, all right, well, let's just negotiate now. What's the price?
Okay, so you're talking like maybe like congregating amongst ourselves and creating a pool of money and finding a way to essentially create our own separate states aside from essentially, I guess like a Chaz Chop but less retarded.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it also could take the form of like, well, where's there a private island I can buy or something like that? I mean, this is ideas that have been floated around for a while, and all I'm doing is like putting it into a formal language of archotropism that explains why it would work.
I just know I've heard you before make remarks about like, say with like tax law, using taxes against your enemies, say like intentionally targeting like, I don't know, like I don't even know like a group I could think of, the DNC or some shit, which I mean, like, I guess I'm not, it's one of those things that like, I don't know. It's like when someone kills a cop or something, I'm like, I don't necessarily support it, but I'm not necessarily against it either. Like, depending on the scenario.
There.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the scenario, really. But if they're being an ass clown and something happens, I'm kind of I mean, but I'm still not like I support, depending on the situation. Maybe this isn't the best example, but I'm trying to think of like a scenario where, say when someone kills like a pedophile or something, I'm like, and on very limited evidence, I'd be like, like I don't know. It's a road I'm maybe hesitant to go down, but I don't know. Even that's a bad example. I'm trying to think of a better one. But you have any thoughts so far, Ace? Or go ahead. Sorry.
I can explain. Why I say, okay, well, we're going to have to use the state to also target the enemies, because there's a problem with the left is that they're willing to burn their own cities to the ground in order to rule over the ashes, and you can't negotiate your freedom with someone like that. And therefore, I say, okay, if our enemies have too much power, we're not going to be able to really negotiate properly with them, or they're going to expect such a high price that we can't possibly afford it. And and therefore there is a need to move them out of the way and replace them with, preferably someone with a little lower of a time preference for power, like a right winger who can be negotiated with, and or they will demand a lower price, to say the very least. And I would say use the state for that reason. If there's going to be like a property tax, and let's just say that I'm not able to ultimately negotiate for my own freedom, I'm not, for what even the right wingers won't do. Let's just say that they won't. I think they will because history's shown that. But, let's just say that they're not. If there's going to be like taxes, I'd prefer my enemies to pay them, not me. I would prefer, if they're going to be, bad law. If there's going to be a public school, I would prefer they taught Rothbard and Mises instead of Marx. And it's like, well, if there is going to be statism and that's inevitable, then I would prefer it was a state controlled by me it was of the libertarians, by the libertarians, and for the libertarians, so to speak. And that's maybe a little idealistic, but that's my preference. I guess I would still ultimately like to use it strategically to move the enemies out of the way and replace them with people who are less skilled negotiators. Let's just
I guess my concern is once you start using the state as a club. I personally, I take the sterner aspect where I don't necessarily morally have anything against it. It's more that like I don't think practically it's going to work out for you. It's kind of not to play the same tired trope, but the One Ring thing where it's like, like it kind of corrupts you or is a corrupting influence. So you think, I'll just use it for this, but it's like it doesn't necessarily end up working out that way. Ace, I'll let you jump off. I bet you have a whole fuckload of thoughts. So go ahead.
Yeah,
probably better than mine.
So I definitely see your point. I definitely see what you're saying. I would just like ask, because I actually think this was one of the disagreements we got in about on Twitter originally, which was how do you define left wing? Is it more of a prescriptive definition in the sense that
I'd say top 50% of people with a time preference for power.
Okay.
So
okay.
That's it's a real simple, top 50% and bottom 50%, and then obviously. Libertarians by that measure at the very, very bottom of it because we're like 0 or near 0, and their average right winger is substantially higher.
Okay. So it's more of a prescriptive definition in the sense that anyone that meets this criteria fits into. Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. That was one of the points I wasn't really clear on originally. But that actually really helped. I think so with the taxation thing, right? So I actually think that you can frame this in a way that some libertarians or some more libertarians might be able to get on board with it in the sense that it's not necessarily like speaking from just libertarian ethics, right? It would not necessarily be unjust by libertarian principles to take like if someone has been taxing you to take their taxes and use that as a quasi restitution. You know what I mean? So that you could also justify it like that. And I think that also it might not fit in completely, right? That might not be completely what you're saying, and I do think it might be easier to get more libertarians on board with that idea if it was couched in kind of those terms.
Yeah, of course. And I see taxations as ultimately the same, although some are worse in principle. If I was going to put a tax on having a loving family, I would say that's probably a more evil tax than owning a house or making a sale or making a sale. And some taxes are in fact worse than others. I would prefer if I can only shift a tax from one form into another, I would prefer to shift it into a more benign form. And and again, I'd always prefer to cut them. And obviously, cut them and replace it with nothing. But life has a bunch of Sophie's choices, and we don't always have that ability to make things the way we want them to. And if I have to shift what I view as like something that's a good thing, like owning property. I think owning private property is a wonderful, good thing that humans should be incentivized to do, not punished for. And, if I can, replace, let's say I take away, I cut that in half and then replace that lost revenue with a tax on, big tech censorship. I would view that as a positive thing. Because I don't want, let's face it, I think censorship is wrong. I think it's antisocial. I think it's corrosive to society, and it's something that's going to ultimately lead to violence, chaos, and instability, and ultimately bigger government and a bigger government intervention like if they do a repeal or maybe a revision of Section 230, I think that would probably make things worse. I would prefer to just put a tax on it. And then cut an equal amount of income taxes or property taxes. Because again, earning an income is a good thing. Humans should be encouraged to do that. Owning property is a good thing. Humans should be encouraged to do that. People should not be censoring each other. That's antisocial behavior. And it has obviously bad effects for us. Because we're going to be the targets of it. It's not going to be the left.
Well, sure. I am curious when you said two things. When you say you're going to tax the left, do you just mean like the leftists who have institutional power? Because I think that was your definition on the time.
They're my top priority. I would say they're a higher priority than the leftists who don't.
Okay.
But all the same, I'm if someone who doesn't have institutional power, if they're, I don't know, maybe taxing prostitution is better than prohibiting it. I would, or maybe taxing heroin is better than prohibiting it.
Oh, sure. I mean, I think just in I think you could make that case for sure.
Yeah. That's a pretty easy one to make for me.
Yeah. I mean, if you take that these people are going to go to jail for years on their life versus lose some of their money. Yeah. I would rather they lose some of their money. Mm-hmm. Right. But that's not necessarily me endorsing, the losing the money in the first place.
Yeah. And again, I do view people with power as a higher priority.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Let me back up. There was something Ace touched on, and I think it was something that's been on my mind as well. And because there are a few critiques I have of this thought space of the post-libertarian, Praxian, NRX, whatever you want to call it.
There we go.
Whatever you want to use. And I've been noticing, and I kind of want to kick it to Ace first to get his opinion, but I feel like there's a bit of a pretentiousness that's coming off, and I'm not saying this to be scolding. I'm saying this to because I get what you guys are getting at, but for the sake of having a more appealing message, maybe not even appealing, but a more clear message, this may behoove these people, is the whole left-right thing. And I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying the problem is there's so many people that come off oh, well, we need, they get really pretentious, well, if you're not left or right, but it's we forget there's a bajillion different fucking definitions of left and right.
Yeah.
But depending on what you're using, according to Konkin, I'm a leftist. According to fucking the culture war, I'm a little bit more skewed to the right. According to your definition, I'm far on the right. So it's I do think it gets sloppy with terms, and I think being pretentious and being overly assertive kind of comes off wrong because you end up talking past each other. And I'm not saying you're wrong, but it's a matter of using your definitions. So and I think you may lose some people along the way who would be with you because they immediately in their head go, well, I'm not, what the fuck is he talking about? Because it's so I don't know if you have more to touch on that, Ace, and I'll let
I think that's a good point because I feel like, as you said, Jose, that there's a lot of different people who identify a lot of different ways with left, right? Originally, if we're speaking just purely in politics, originally left wing just meant people who sat on the left side of the French Parliament, and right wingers for the opposite of that. So there's a whole list of different definitions people use for left and right, probably more than even how people use capitalism or some of these other contentious terms. There's all these different definitions. So I feel like what Jose said is right, where it's I think just from a rhetorical point of view, we should be careful about alienating potential people who could be allies, maybe, because it's there are a lot of marginalized groups out there who might be considered, or they might self-identify as left wing, but they might not be left wing in the sense that you're defining them as. And I feel like using that rhetoric might turn them off.
I think you're making fair points. I would say my definition using time preference for power predicts pretty much all of the other definitions that people use,
right?
Because they're all trying to use the best language that they can to define the same idea, and they're trying to put a word fence around an abstract idea that's very tough to use. And I feel like the definition I've come up with using time preference for power does it exactly. Sure. Because a lower time preference for power will give you the hierarchy that the that the right really wants, it will also give you the a higher one. Lower one will give you the hierarchy that the right wants, and a higher time preference will give you the equality and egalitarianism that the left wants. It will also give you their view of lifestyles, where a right winger will prefer a more traditional lifestyle because that's more hierarchical, and a left winger will prefer a more libertine or degenerate lifestyle, because that's more egalitarian and tends towards egalitarianism, and actually is one of the major causes of it. So I do feel like the one I of course I'm biased. I'm very biased. I do feel like the one I'm using is it should be the one, but I recognize that it's not, and I think I'm demonstrating the pretentiousness right now. So it's like I understand where they're coming from, and I do try to thank you for bringing it up early. I do try to always define left and right in terms of here's exactly what I mean by that.
And I'm not even disagreeing with your definition, but I'm merely saying that I think we should account for the fact that there are a lot of people who do not share that definition, who might be confronted with what they see as abrasiveness, right? From the start. Yeah. So I'm not even being contentious over your definition, but I just feel like there are a lot of marginalized groups out there, people who might self-identify as left, who, if we really took this tact without explaining it properly, and I'm not saying you didn't explain it properly, I'm just giving an example here, I feel like it might turn a lot of potential allies off.
I agree. I am. That's one. Besides the Archotropism framework and the anti-tax and Mises GP and all that, one thing I am trying to push is my definition, because I really do think it's the one that hits the nail on the head. But I recognize that the one I'm using is it's basically me and a handful of other people on Twitter.
Right. Do you at all worry about? I'm not necessarily saying this is the case, but it's kind of a thought I've had a little bit. Do you at all worry that your definition kind of slips into that which is bad is left and that which is good is right? Because it kind of, I'm not saying you're wrong. I feel like this, when you get into this but that's kind of getting at, when you get into this preference territory, you get into very subjective territory. It kind of well, what is high time preference? You know what I mean? It gets very, and I'm not saying you're wrong. I guess it feels like it gets into a more vague territory. Say at least something like egalitarianism, or what's the opposite? I'm having a brain fart.
Hierarchy.
At least with that's more clear. That's a very clear definition. But when you're talking time preference, and I don't disagree either.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying you get into more vague territory because, for example, everyone knows Hoppe made comments about the gays and high time preference. And I don't know, maybe he's right, maybe he's wrong. I don't know. Part of the problem of having a state is that we don't have a true free market to where we can actually see what really bears out. You know what I mean? So it kind of skews that.
The way that Hoppe uses it, and the same way I use it, it's production versus consumption. Basically, it's, do you want to eat the one marshmallow an hour or two later? Mm-hmm. And basically, it's what's your consumption rate, and when it's your consumption preference. That's what you're really talking about. Yeah. And when I say and I will use this in my framework when I say, okay, that kinetic power is the consumption of potential power, and kinetic power is explicitly only coercive power, and potential power is everything that isn't coercive power. Yeah. And so when potential power is consumed, that is what makes it kinetic. So so when you were saying behaviors that are high time preference, they are consumptive behaviors, and they are by nature they're unproductive or net unproductive, and that's something that would be that's how I would use that. And so and then that kind of begs the question, what is really consuming more than it's taking out? And and I think that is where that discussion really leads, because is sitting on the couch eating Cheetos unproductive? And I would say, well, no, people need a break, every now and then. Maybe in excess it gets to be that, because you end up not earning enough money to meet your lifestyle needs, and so at that point you are consuming more than you're producing. At that point I would say stop. I would say, but something like let's just kick the hornet's nest. Let's say you're like having a God, there's so many good examples. Let's say you're a prostitute or something like that, and you're basic. What you're doing is you're making a short sale on the value of female chastity or something like that. Because let's face it, a pair of shoes that's had 50 previous owners is going to be less valuable than a brand new.
A key that opens many locks is awesome. A lock that's opened by many keys is useless.
Yeah, pretty much. And it's like you're putting a short sale on something that's like a multi-million-dollar asset. And if you think about what that value is worth under a marital contract, because that's what marriage is, it's a contract. And if that's something that would probably be worth upper hundreds of thousands, versus like lower 8 figures, and if you're really, really good, and you're taking that and you're selling it for like $400 an hour or something like that. That's assuming you're a really, really good one, and that you're not getting you're really, it's like taking a multi-million-dollar mansion and selling it for like $100,000, and that's you're basically squandering wealth that you could have had, and that's that's increasing poverty, that's consuming more wealth than it is producing. And I would say you're probably better off getting hitched to some rich dude with a fistful of cash.
So I mostly agree on the subject of time preference, but wouldn't you say, because even if they're engaged in like high time preference behavior, they're still like creating they're still showing their preference for that high time preference behavior. So in some sense, couldn't you say that they themselves, from their own subjective experience, are gaining more than they're losing because of their voluntary choice? You know what I mean?
You could, but at the same time, it's like, okay, they're gaining that value now, but
yes,
they're squandering an asset in asset in the future.
Yes,
and
yeah.
I do think that's where you get to the point where, okay, are you building up society's wealth this way, or are you not? And I would say that no, probably this is net unproductive. This is net consumptive, or something like that.
Right. I was only speaking of from the subjective perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And whereas what I was saying, I put a multi-million-dollar figure on it because I was actually trying to put an actual value on it.
Okay.
These are what these things are actually worth on average.
Right. Yeah, I see your point.
Yeah, sounds like you're putting the pussy on a pedestal, bro.
It's like, sure. I mean, yeah, you can sell a multi-million-dollar mansion for a few $100,000, and somebody else is getting a great deal, but this is, on the whole, making yourself poorer is something that should be discouraged. And by the way, you have a right to do it. That doesn't mean you should. That's
sure.
Kind of the point.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
That's like, again, I'm not here to say, oh, we need to tax the pants off prostitutes, or actually tax the pants back on the prostitutes. But I'm not here to advocate persecuting them. I'm not here. I don't believe in prohibition, obviously, but I am going to make an argument that, okay, you're hurting your own interests. And that's fairly objective.
Well, yeah, with time preference, I think people sometimes get confused because they associate time. When some people talk about time preference, they think they're adding a moral value judgment to it or an ethical value judgment to it based on like the NAP. And that's not necessarily the case. It's more of an economic value judgment than it is. Yeah.
Just most people take clips of Hoppe talking about the gays and immigrants and shit like that. So
and communists and parasitism.
That is actually one question I did have, because I've heard you talk about this before. You gave your definition of left and right. Can you give a definition of what you necessarily mean by degeneracy? Is it just high time preference?
Well, it comes from the word to degenerate. You're degenerating society. Degenerating civilization back into barbarism, because that barbarism is a function of poverty. It really is, because now you're having to fight over ultra scarce resources that are not in nearly high enough production. And this is why all wars are basically trade wars. They're fights over resources.
Yeah.
And if you put them in that context, that some people have who have a higher time preference for power, they're going to be the ones who are much more likely to go after scarce resources, particularly if those resources are very scarce and they're the ones who personally need them. And so if you're bringing society closer to that, there's that's a problem that really ought to be corrected. And I don't know, maybe you have the right to bring yourself closer to, the jungle method of, resource allocation. But I really think that that's something that we as a society should actively discourage. We should always be encouraging the productive method of resource reallocation.
Sure. I don't think anything you said should be, libertarians should not freak out about anything you've said so far, in my opinion, because I think, I think, it's very similar to Hoppe, because Hoppe, Hoppe gets misconstrued a lot in his work, like what he's saying. He like people think he's making some moral value judgment when he's just speaking purely on practical economic value.
Because people are fucking retards and monkeys. I know.
The problem is he's too based, and he was based ahead of his time.
Yeah.
But I just because why I wanted to ask your definitions, because I think I agree mostly with you, but I think for a lot of libertarians out there, especially they get this idea that especially so for most libertarians, I understood what you were saying when you were talking about power. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of libertarians, when they hear power, they only think of state power. And
they put the moral judgment on it,
right? Yes, that's right.
And they put, and when I say that, okay, your high time preference behavior makes you fundamentally less free, of course, because they say, freedom is good, and they're the ones, in fact, putting the moral judgment on it. And in fact, I usually agree with their moral judgment, but it's that the reason they react so emotionally is that what I'm saying is your behavior is less good, and it's not in line with your own values, and you ought to behave in line with your own values, and they want to have that, and that cognitive dissonance is too much for them.
This kind of brings a perfect segue for another point we're talking about, the whole thick versus thin. And I was thinking today about this and this whole concept, and this is kind of like where the whole wealth, power, and influence concept kind of comes in, because this is kind of the idea of, well, make yourself better. It's kind of like how you say how weakness invites aggression, so don't be a weak little bitch. It's really that simple. And people will try to be like, just get richer or whatever the fuck, and or make more money, bro. But it's like, we're Austrians. We know wealth isn't necessarily only monetary. So whatever you hold to be value or people hold to be valuable, increase that. So whether that means be more in shape, be faster, be more influential, have more money, have whatever. So I feel like that's kind of where this whole thick versus thin,
anything that has value,
you kind of tie into economics. That's kind of what it is in a sense. So I'll let you guys go, because I know Ace wanted to talk. That was one thing he brought up. So I'll let you guys go.
So I think we should also, for the audience, we should talk about what thin versus thick libertarianism is, because I know a lot of libertarians are don't know. So thin libertarianism is essentially just the belief that so there's a couple different types. Some people think thick versus thin is an ethical argument. I actually think it's more of a strategic argument, personally.
Some people think it's definitional too. So that's another thing. We talked about
that's what I mean. Yeah.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry, my bad. Didn't mean to
cut you. No, you're fine. So thin libertarianism would be people who mainly use libertarianism to mean self-ownership and the non-aggression principle, right? And that's just it. They don't usually, when they're arguing for libertarianism,
that comes from that.
Yeah. So they essentially just talk about how, well, that's it, and all these other cultural issues, we're just going to remain agnostic towards this, right? Thick libertarianism, which is often associated with the left, and I think it gets I think some libertarians dismiss it. Some right libertarians would dismiss it because a lot of thick libertarians tend to be left libertarians. But Hoppe is a good example of a thick right libertarian, right? So thick libertarianism is essentially saying that, okay, you have the center structure, which is self-ownership and the non-aggression principle. That is still there, but when we're conveying this message, we need more than just the nap and self-ownership, because most people do not just look at moral, their moral lens is not just self-ownership and the nap for most people, right? Even after you've explained to them why self-ownership is a more moral system, they still have cultural beliefs that they don't let go of, or they just have a hard time to let go of. Now, maybe you think that's a bad thing, they should let go of them, maybe you don't, that is up for discussion. But I think if we want to convince people, if we want to bring more people in, I do think we do have to couch our libertarian arguments within the cultural framework that most people exist in. Right. And now I'm not even saying that, if you're a leftist and you want to do that, I think, you should try to do that. I'm as far as strategy goes, I am agnostic on strategy in the sense that I don't have the knowledge to say that, okay, I'm positive that this strategy will work better than this one. I would rather let them play out in almost like a decentralized collective in some sense, you know what I mean, with like thick libertarian movements in other areas, and see what works there.
Yeah, 50 laboratories of democracy.
Yeah, right.
And I always say that good laws are custom tailored to the people that they govern. And my criticism of thin libertarian, because I would say as a Praxian, I've left thin libertarianism behind. Praxianism, if it is libertarianism, it is a very thick verb.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And because all these laws that we have, basically, okay, the order of operations always goes religion, culture, politics, law.
Right.
And basically, by politics, I mean the political system. Are you like a monarchy, a democracy, or private property society? And basically, this is the custom tailoring order, because all these three feed into each other. Your religion feeds into your culture feeds into your politics, your political system, I should say, and your political system feeds into what exactly the laws are. And the problem with thin libertarianism is that it's kind of an orphan. It's with the one, and it doesn't descend from. It doesn't have any parents or grandparents or great grandparents. It kind of is just there, and it's a legal system in search of a people that are just not custom tailored to it at all. And when you understand that your legal system is the consequence of these upper three levels, your political system, your cultural system, and your religious system, then you really understand. Okay, this is like the end of the waterfall. You can't put the water back up there, and this is the end of the stream. This is the end of the road. It's the end of the road, and and so if you're trying to say, oh, we are the legal system, we're above this, like, well, no, you're not. You're nothing, and you're a legal system in search of a people, a culture, and a creed.
Well, one way to couch this, I think, I was reading Emma Goldman's, I forget the name of the piece, but the whole concept is the minority, the majority. So like in that essay, she's talking about how the minority is the only thing that ever gets anything done. And once an idea enters the majority, it kind of gets vague and then kind of corrupted somewhat. And I think thin libertarian kind of has that issue. Libertarianism, I think definitionally libertarianism is thin.
Yes,
but the thing is, you need to find your thick. You need to find the thick.
Yes.
And you need to work within it, because whether you're wrong or not, it's kind of like, well, I mean, I read Anatomy of State again, and I did the episode with Dave on it, and at the end we're talking about how like the last paragraph is talking about how like Rothbard admits we don't know what the fuck we're doing. Like we don't know the correct tactics. Like this is the chore for our generation, is to figure that the fuck out. Yeah, like that's our work.
And if I can just, go ahead.
And I was just gonna say, if you want to do that, you need to kind of create a minority. If we're existing in this like thin libertarian space and it's all okay, whatever, blah blah blah. I'm not saying it's not okay. I'm just saying you need to find your thick libertarianism and work within that avenue, because that way you allow the minority to do what it's supposed to do, just in the whole minority majority divide that Emma Goldman's talking about. But go ahead.
And I identified as like a thin libertarian for a long time, because I kind of viewed it as more of like a definitional thing for a long time, whereas it was like, oh, well, I just see libertarianism, the ethics of it distilled down to it is self-ownership in that, and I still believe that. But I think strategically, thick libertarianism is so much superior, like strategically, to if you want to advance the movement, you have to couch these ideas of self-ownership in the NAP within like the framework of other cultural beliefs, and those cultural beliefs can help you attract more people in. Because if you immediately, if most people have a cultural sway one way or the other, and you're saying, well, no, that doesn't matter, right? Just strategically, you're turning those people off immediately. You know what I mean? Yeah. So it makes sense to have like multiple like groups of thick libertarians trying their best to see, okay, what is going to attract the most amount of people, and which one is going to be the most conducive to liberty itself in the long run.
Yeah, I mean, if you're, you have to understand. Okay, well, where does this libertarianism fit in? What culture does it fit in with? What creed does it fit in with? And because understand that this has to be the consequence of these higher order things. And when you have a if it doesn't fit into one, then it can't be the logical consequence, because whatever is the logical consequence of those higher things is going to outcompete it and force it out.
Right. If you're in a majority society where people think slavery is okay, obviously your principles is not going to, it's not going to do anything. So
if you're in a society where majority of people think, robbing your neighbor to feed your own consumption is okay.
That's right.
That's right. A legal system that can work. You're all going to be slaves to it. Basically. Yeah. You're all going to be in prison. So what's the point?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
If the people can't keep the law, it's a bad law. It's like drug prohibition. It's an idiotic law because people cannot be expected to to abide by it.
Yes.
And adding like drug or alcohol or sex work prohibitions, people cannot possibly be expected to be moral enough and self-restrained enough not to partake in these things. That's why these are bad laws. And you should tailor the laws to the moral level of the people. And the NAP is kind of like the biggest one, because people are incentivized to be aggressive and to have this aggressive order because it pays them. And it's like they should have the self-restraint not to, but they don't, and they haven't for like 6,000 years. It's like it's gotten better over time. We've gotten away from the barbarian method, but we've managed at this point, after 1,400 years of Christian progress, we've managed to get them off of the private aggression, which was pretty normal back then for all of human history. That of course I have a right to privately aggress against my neighbor. Why not? We've gotten them off of that. We've gotten them to only the public method now. Method, and we're still working on it, but we're going to have to work a little harder. But this thing takes time.
Descriptively, I completely agree with someone like Max Stirner, right? Like the only rights descriptive, in a descriptive sense, the only rights you have are the ones you can actually defend, right? That's just that's an obvious truism practically. It's if someone comes up. Right, exactly. If someone comes up to murder me,
ass mad by that, though.
Yeah, I know they do, because Stirner's not saying might is right; he's just saying might is right. Yes. He's just so
might is right.
Right, yeah, right. So it's like if someone comes to murder me, and I talk about you can't do that because of the NAP. Oh, yeah. You can't do that because of the NAP. It's obviously insane, right? No, that's
Can't do it because of the Constitution.
No, right, exactly.
Same argument.
It's exactly the same argument. So ultimately, you like it's always easy for me to say, right? Well, the end goal is obviously getting rid of the state, but that's not even really a strategy. But obviously, once we reach a point where the cost of these people committing their aggression is higher than the profit of it, then you're going to start seeing some differences.
I like using the is to describe Stirner and natural rights, or egoistic rights and natural rights, because egoistic rights are just is, and then natural rights are what ought to be. So
exactly.
So that's the best way to put it, in my opinion. So
and there's no way. And once you accept that that's reality, it's like you you automatically move over to like a thick libertarianism, and a right wing version at that, because there is no left wing. There's no sense, okay, if you're having a higher time preference for power, there's no sense in which that's going to be compatible with the NAP, which is like 0. And so if you want to have a NAP society, you have to move to the to the right, even if you're not using my definition, like just a cultural definition. They're the only ones who can do it, and that's why it's the only ones that we should really even bother making the appeal to, because let's face it, they're the only ones with the culture that descends from Christianity, which has that that whole love your neighbor as yourself sort of thing, which is basically if you have that as the greatest commandment in Christianity, that's 100% compatible with the NAP.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So it's like that's that's where all of that descends from, and that if you're coming from the left, which has I don't even know what they believe, wokeism and social justice at this point, and hyper egalitarianism, there's no possibility of that being compatible with what we
Sure.
want.
I do think it depends on the type of left, and like going by what they themselves would define as left. Because I'm not sure I completely agree that only a hyper right wing thick libertarianism can work. But I'm also not going to fight you because I don't have enough evidence to support it. I would on that I would be like I'm willing just to see what happens, right?
Yeah.
I do think it's interesting when we're talking about like how cultural would reflect the law, and I actually think libertarians don't account for this, but like there's actually ways in which this could happen in a libertarian sense too, right? Which is like if we were in a completely anarchist society and you had a right-wing culture and you had a right-wing like legal system that was compliant with the NAP, you could still see something like, let's say, within this right-wing culture, you would not have maybe mediators or arbiters or whatever you want to call them arbitrate certain disputes or protect certain people's rights within that society. They would just be like, yeah, well, we legally wouldn't aggress against you, but we're also not going to protect you at all. And that could be influenced by their cultural leanings too. So you could also I think you would see that play out in certain areas within like an anarchist society.
Potentially.
Yeah.
Again, the thing I would ask is because the one piece of thick libertarian. By the way, this is something that Though Bishop has mentioned before, that we're not going to get to a more libertarian society without a Christian revival, and because let's face it, none of us really knows how to make a religion, so we're kind of stuck choosing between them or not. And it's like we've been doing the whole atheism thing for a while, but what we've seen is that people are still monkeys. And the monkeys will try to create their own woke religion, and this doesn't work out well, and we still haven't quite mastered how to do that the right way yet. So if anyone knows how to make a much better low time preference religion than Christianity, by all means. That is like I'd love to hear it and see how that spreads, but I don't have a solution for that. It's like
as the resident atheist here, which I don't know if Ace is or not, but I kind of agree with you, huh?
Yeah,
I'm agnostic.
Okay, but I'm agnostic. I'm an agnostic atheist because those are different questions.
Okay,
but,
so
I just go by atheist because I don't like fiddling around with the terms. But whatever, Emma. But like, I kind of agree with you because one epiphany I had a while back is, and I've said this before, is people always talk about like when they with the theism debate they always for some reason bring it to the founders and be like, well. The religious people are like, well, the founders were religious, and the atheists would be like, well, no, they weren't, and it's just a stupid back and forth. But it's like you guys are missing the point. Yeah. The point is the people were religious, and whether the founders were or not doesn't really kind of matter. If anything, it kind of proves the point I'm getting at more. If they were atheists, that it's kind of like, because I mean, me as an atheist, I kind of don't agree with religion, but I mean, I can see the utility of it.
Yeah.
So like, if you had these atheists kind of in a sense reigning on high. While they kind of let the peasants believe, hey, here's this fucking doctrine that says do good things and don't do bad things, then, fucking, that's dope. Right. I would hazard, my biggest thing, and I don't know, I'd like to hear Ace's thoughts on this. I would hazard against what I've been calling religious maximalism, which I've been seeing from this. And because I also think, like, people that think like me, like, why the fuck would we be like, you must be religious, or like, because like, and I have seen some of that where it's like I don't necessarily. My thing is like whatever I have to use to get you to the end goal I want you to be is what I'll do. I would actually prefer me personally because I think it's more logical. I would prefer everyone was just a fucking abided by the NAP, wasn't religious, whatever. But I understand that that's not what like there's utility in a prepackaged ideology that kind of sort of gets you to where I want you to be. And while I think it's illogical to do that, and I think that can cause future problems, it's kind of like, well, it's a shortcut to get you to where I want you to go for now. And whatever, we can fucking work on your logic later. I kind of don't give a fuck.
It's also goes back to like the Stirner thing, right? I think it's important to distinguish between the right. I don't think you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think you're saying that libertarianism is only ethically consistent. It can only ethically be consistent with Christianity, but that it like Christianity has utility in getting us there.
Yeah, I basically agree with that. Is that if there's some hypothetical other religion that fits in better with the NAP, that would be good. That would suffice, but it doesn't exist.
Okay, yeah, that's all.
Like, none of us knows how to create it.
Sure.
And I would point out with the founders, like every single last one of them agreed that the Constitution that they wrote was designed for a Christian people, and it was wholly unfit for people who were not Christian, as we're seeing right now. And that's this is why I say, hey, when conservatives talk about wanting to conserve the Constitution, I say, you guys are stupid. This is not we don't live in a Christian in a Christian nation anymore. And it was that this thing was designed for a people who were overwhelmingly like really hardcore Protestant Christian, and that's just not what we have today.
Right.
And not even close. And we're far more non-Christian than we are Christian. Yeah. So it's like, okay, we shouldn't be conserving a constitution that was not designed for the people that we have today. We should always have laws that are designed for the people that we have, with the culture that we have, with the politics that we have. And because again, it's like these things are consequential. The religion feeds down into the culture, which feeds down into the political system, which feeds down into the laws. And it's like you can't just put it's like trying to put a square peg into a round hole. It just you can't. It doesn't work. That's not the way it's supposed to work.
It would be like trying to, like, if we were in a society where like slavery was like just rampant, and we just said, okay, slavery is bad. It's like, okay, well, if the majority of people believe in that society that slavery is good, what's that law going to do? Like, you just like it's an insurmountable task at that point, right? So
pretty much.
And I think you. When you say like, because I feel like I'm looking at this from like how most libertarians will hear that, and I feel like when you say like laws should reflect the culture of the people, you're saying that in the sense that makes the most sense, right? Like that just like logically that makes the most sense.
Actually creates the most liberty too.
Oh,
because
okay.
Again, like if I use the example of like drug prohibition, that if you have people who are at like moral level A, and you put the bar up here. It's like, all right, well, now everyone under here is in the prison population. So
right.
It's like that, you don't want everyone in real Gen Pop. We are all in Gen Pop, obviously, but we just don't call it that. It's an open air prison. And but if you want them in real Gen Pop, it's like, well, go ahead, start creating laws that you have no real expectation for people to follow. It's like, even if you don't think what you're doing is the law itself is moral, as long as it's within, it's like, can they be reasonably expected to follow it? Yes or no? And because you don't want a slave population, a real slave population, because that's how you get it.
Right. So
it's like making custom tailoring laws to the moral level of the people is how you keep people free.
Yeah, and to touch on that whole example, it's kind of like, if you just say slavery is bad, but if you can somehow inoculate that into like maybe inoculate something right word, but if you can bake that into fucking into religious terms of like, well, if you look at this passage, it says that God says that you shouldn't do slavery or whatever the fuck. If you can get them to buy into that, it's kind of like, well, okay. If you have to say, well, God said, and that's if that's the magic words I have to say to get you to fucking come to liberty, I don't give a fuck. Like That's kind of where I'm coming from. So like, I get the utility, and I know there are a lot of people that are like, I mean, it's kind of like the fucking bell curve thing when it comes to religion. There are people who are, it's almost like the hyper smart end up being religious, but then also the really dumb. And then like a lot of the midwits, I'm not necessarily calling myself a midwit. I do feel like I'm the upper end of midwit, but like,
the irony is that the God of the Bible would at least agree with what you're saying.
Yeah,
because he's right there for like 1,500 years, really trying to beat it into their heads, like what kind of morality he believes in, and they're just not getting it.
Yeah,
and so you can say God says it all day long. Even God knows that doesn't work.
Yeah, but it works a lot better than like, well, if you look at these ethical principles and blah 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 blah. Sometimes it works better, especially if you're dealing with a religious people. So I mean, it is what it is. Ace, let me ask you: do you have any other critiques of Archotropism? And really, I guess we can just open this up to like this general thought space at large. I feel like we've kind of touched on just about all of them, but if there's anything else that you can think of that's been sitting on your mind, let me know. I mean,
I think it's kind of what I've said before. I feel like I generally agree with your thesis, right? I generally agree with that. I do think the rhetorical, so there can be like a rhetorical hazard in using some of the terms. You know what I mean? In the same way that, as we said, in the same way that you want laws tailored to the culture. In some sense, I think using definitions tailored to how most people use the definitions might also work out like that. Because I feel like if you're just using a definition that, and this applies to like even definitions I would use, right? So but I feel like if you use that, you end up you risk alienating a lot of people who might otherwise be potential allies, or maybe they're not, but we don't know until we try in some sense.
I say, you're right. And I do want to also start accelerating that self-segregation into left and right. And I do feel like, alienating the proper people is I'm alienating more of the bad kind that I really don't want than I am the good kind. I consider that a net positive. And so, and I think that's the way we're going to end up having to work towards this thing is, marginally, one little bit at a time. And as long as we're making, progress, we'll get there. And so it's like I use the terms I use as part of that acceleration because, we need to, the biggest acceleration I think we need to have is a self-segregation into blue states with virtually all, uniform, liberals and lefties, and then righties all in the other states. And I think, that is the best case scenario we can make for a real, like, hardcore divorce of the country, because right now the laws we have right now, they don't work well with either side, either culture, and they really ought to.
Right.
It's like I feel for the lefties having to live under laws that are far closer to the right than they want. And obviously, as a right winger, I don't want anything to do with the left's laws. And and I'm sure we would be, and accelerating that difference to where it's just all lefties living in California and on the West Coast, and all righties living in the middle of America and maybe the Southeast.
Oh, I 100% agree. It's like, it should be the easiest sell of all time, right? Yeah. That should be, because it's like, okay, would you rather have a bad roommate or a bad neighbor?
Pretty much.
So it's like the idea that people should be locked in this polity where they hate each other and they're never going to get what they want by definition because of the nature of power itself.
This is an arranged marriage. None of us agreed to this.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
To back up Ace's point, though, earlier a little bit, I will say I actually entirely agree with you, and you know this full well, Pops, because we've talked about this. You're basically saying the same things I've said, which is kind of the self-segregation. But obviously, we can refine this. And me reading through the Anarchist Handbook right now, I'm seeing a lot of these different people that we would call socialists, leftists, whatever, that they are essentially describing the exact same thing, but coming from different terms. And there's a lot of that. So I do think there is some. I'm not saying stop. Not that you would, but I'm not saying stop what you're doing. But to maybe in some ways refine terms or be a little bit more conscious, I think is a good way to go forward, because there are legit fucking like ANSOCs out there that are like basically if you sat down and talked to them, they're describing ANCAP. That's exact. But just by different terms. We'll just sit there and argue like retards about some fucking definition. It's like, dude, we're describing the same fucking thing. Like, use whatever word you want. I don't give a shit. Like, and there's a lot of that. I mean, obviously there's minor differences here and there, but there's a lot of overlap. So I do think there is some, and I do think more. You are right. More often than not, you are, shooing away the right people and pulling in the right people as well. So, but there's obviously you can maximize that. You can maximize that effect.
Yeah.
So,
no, I would say the vast majority of anarchists out there are ANCAPs, not ANSOCs. And I mean, there's I don't know if there's a few dozen of them, or probably more than that, but. I don't really want the Antifa types, the real ANSOCs, I don't really want them here. It's like, I'm fine with pushing them away. Get them out. Get the fuck out. I
was using an example is that a lot of them are basically describing the same thing. Obviously the modern day definition of ANSOC is not the same thing that fucking, Proudhon or fucking, or I don't know, say Tucker was necessarily describing. Yeah. But assuming those people exist out there, some of the rhetoric that we've been using today may scare them away when it's like, dude, we're describing the same fucking thing. And I'm not saying you're wrong, because it is a numbers game. It's like, but it's just a matter of maybe if being more conscious with rhetoric we can be, and I'm not even, that's why all of this whole critique, this whole episode has been mostly semantics, but I do think it is kind of good to kind of, I don't know, what's the word I'm looking for, to, I don't know, put your shit together better in a more direct clear way. So,
be more nuanced.
Yeah.
And
so,
people also be better at understanding nuance. So it's like,
that's true.
Well, it's like, gosh, you can get better, but it's almost like the smarter rats and smarter mousetraps, or better mousetraps, smarter rats.
Right.
And I feel like you can get better at nuance, and people can get worse at understanding it.
Right. I feel like the crux of this is the crux of the disagreement in general, like not just here, but it's not even a disagreement, it's semantic, but it's and of like libertarians out on Twitter would be like, this is the difference between like a prescriptive definition and a descriptive definition. Like a descriptive definition would be like leftists who just call themselves leftists, and that's what leftist means. I call myself leftist. You know what I mean? And then you have with like a prescriptive definition like that. And we talked before how, prescription doesn't do well when met up with reality, right? So like if someone comes to my door and tries to hurt me, I can't just prescribe some moral thing and convince them that that's wrong. So I think you're kind of going to, I'm repeating myself, but I think you're kind of going to like run up into that problem. That's what I would see. But I'm not disagreeing with your theory, but I'm just saying I think that you might.
It's presentation, disagreement rather than content.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
I really think the Archotropism framework, it's hard to disagree with because it's so logical. It's basic Misesianism. There's no part of it they really should disagree with, except that when you get to some of the consequences of it, it's like, oof, people don't like that because they've been saying the opposite for quite a lot longer, and that it's a kind of what you mentioned earlier of a consequence fallacy, where they have, okay, well, if your thing is true, then that has these awful consequences, and we can't possibly have that. Like, well, yeah, we can actually, and that's one I've got. That's one I've gotten repeatedly. Is like, okay, well, if state is inevitable, then what are we all doing here? It's like, good question.
I mean, I would add to that, not to get a whole off a side tangent. Me being the agorist, I do kind of agree that the state is inevitable, but it doesn't mean you have to exist within it.
I agree.
So, like, because the state you have to understand what the state is. The state is just, it's the superstition of, or the superstition of authority, or whatever the fuck, or of coercive authority, and to be more specific. So, like, there will always be someone somewhere who, feels like they're entitled to rule over someone else, and then also on the inverse, there will be someone who feels like someone else is entitled to rule over them. So, yes, it will always be a thing. No matter, I always equate it to racism. It gets a little clunky when you confuse the two, but like, racism will always exist. It's just a matter of like to what extent, and like, or what is its effect, and obviously coercive, non-coercive. You look at, like, there was definitely coercive racism at some point. Now there's now it's kind of retreating into non-coercive racism, like whatever. But I mean, now we're gonna get a little confusing terms. But you get my point. And so, like, I know a lot of people say stuff like, well, the state will always exist, so we need to do this. But it's like, yeah, but you don't have to exist within it. Like, yes, the state will always exist, but that doesn't. And it's kind of, I know Ace talks on this a lot when it comes to like anarchy, and people are like, oh, well, there's never been an anarchy state, and like there has, for one. But even then, it's kind of like, yeah, but there have been pockets of areas that weren't state controlled, and or even then, within a state controlled area, you can orient your life to be less state controlled. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's not the 0-1.
Let me ask you, as the resident agorist, if I, like, let's say, because one of the things I really want to do with Mises GOP is convince the state that it is in their best interest to IPO the thing and privatize it. And is there anything in agorism that would prevent you from being like, hey, I'd like to buy a few of those shares for voting? And is there anything in agorism that prevents you from interacting with or being a part of a private state, as in, like, this is a private I am the state of my own private property?
I mean, if by that you mean you've like bought an area, I guess it depends what you mean. Yeah. I mean, also, when I say I'm an agorist, I also am saying that, like, that's what best describes my line of thought. I'm not. That doesn't mean that, like, if you
understand the theory,
prescribe
though, right?
something that would somehow go against what Conkin said, that me, because I describe myself as an agorist, have to immediately be like, oh, no way. Like, it's just the closest thing to my. So it's not like I'm like religiously married to Conkin's thoughts. He's so far, he's been the thinker that has best described what I think.
Like, I mean, you understand the theory of it, though, much better than I do.
I mean, it would really have to depend on what you mean.
That would go against?
I mean, it would depend on what you mean, I guess. Because he really wasn't too entirely. I mean, I have to reread it. I mean, but like if you're talking about like a private state, which I mean, at that point, if you're talking about a private state, it's not even really a state at that point. It's kind of almost just like, hey, here's my private property.
It is the monopoly of aggression on its own territory. So,
but I mean, how is that any different from private property? Like if my own property. So like, I mean, especially if you bought it. But go ahead. Sorry.
I think there is a difference between like private property and a state, because I think that one of the ways that the state differentiates itself through its monopoly on violence is actually through like if you have a piece of property and if you had a monopoly on violence in it, that means that legally speaking, you could do whatever you want to a person on your property. So I think there is a little bit of difference. I think I would use the term, if on your property you have a monopoly on use of it, right? So you can exclude other people. But with the state, if you framed it in the sense that you had a monopoly on violence on the property, I think that would imply that you had a right to do whatever you wanted to a person standing on your property. And I don't think that's quite accurate in a libertarian sense. So I would make that distinction.
Well, I mean, obviously, did the person come onto your property with a contract or not? Do they have a right to be there? Yes or no? If not, then you have every right to remove them.
Yes.
I mean, that's the basic idea that I want to start moving us all towards, is because once you have a private for-profit state, it makes the negotiation very simple. Because it's really easy to say that, okay, if this is if the state has a profit motive, an explicit profit motive, it's very simple to say, here's 10 years of taxes or something like that, or 15 years of taxes, and let me go. I want my own private property carved out of your territory, and you're not, and this is the end. This is a buyout clause or something like that, and that makes the negotiation quite a lot simpler. And this is kind of that. So that's what I've been wanting to go towards, is, instead of trying to abolish the state first and then let people create their own states afterwards, privatize the state first, then just buy my way out, because most people want the state. So abolishing it's going to be very, very difficult. But I want my liberty, and buying that should be made as straightforward as possible.
I see what you're saying, but I do think that I feel like calling it a private state is a bit of a misnomer, a little bit. Like I feel like libertarians are going to come into conflict with that. You know what I mean? Just definition.
We've never really had one before. Not really.
Right.
But as the way I see it, there is no, even when we have a public state and you have a Mexican who wasn't supposed to be here, we don't say, okay, well, you're allowed to just aggress against them or whatever. We just say, time to remove them, send them back.
Well,
the minimum we need to do to, appropriately send them back. And, I would view it the same way as anyone who comes onto my property without permission to be there. I have the right to use the minimum amount of force to simply remove them. But if they come onto my property with a contract that, and we have a agreed upon set of rules, that is different. That's different. This is kind of what I'm talking about, is the Yarvin patchwork is what I think is they move there first and then move towards, the Ancapistan liberty.
Right. I would say, though, in the example of the immigrant, I think they do that, but ultimately the state could say that they do have a legal, if they wanted to, they could give themselves the legal right to just kill people on site. Do you know what I mean? Like, legally speaking, from their own definitional framework. If they with the monopoly, they don't practically speaking, I agree with you.
Yeah.
But definitionally, if they have a monopoly on violence, that would imply that they could, do whatever they wanted to that person.
I mean, again, but now you're making should arguments instead of.
Oh, I am. I am. No, I am. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would say the what is is probably something closer to this because people don't just do that.
Oh, sure.
They could, but they could also do that like in Anarchistan, but they shouldn't, and they probably won't because that's just not
right. I was speaking
their interests.
I was speaking only from the definition of like the state and how libertarians use it in the frame of their moral perspective, right? Like the more like libertarians would say like, well, like a private property owner could just like kill someone standing on their property for no reason, but they would still say that's ethically wrong. You know what I mean? Right. Yeah. So I think that ethical difference is what separates the private property from the state, in my opinion. It is a should statement. So it's a difference of ethics, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because again, I'm always as the Archotropism guy. I'm trying to point out here's the incentive, and the state always behaves its incentives, and it's like that virtually almost without exception. And it's I see that this is why I see it as an engineering problem. Is we just have to behave the incentives in the way they want us to, use that formula properly, and liberty should be very achievable. I mean, if we follow the equation, there's no reason it shouldn't work because incentives are what they are, and the state virtually universally behaves.
Yeah, descriptively, I completely agree. Yeah,
and that's why I asked that question. Is like, is this as an agorist? If you had a private state, kind of like what Yarvin describes in Patchwork, where it is a legitimate state because it owns the property, and everyone who lives there has signed a contract to that effect, and nobody who doesn't is there. Like, is that would there be a problem as an agorist with, hey, I'd like to buy a few of those shares on the stock exchange?
Yeah, I mean, I don't see why there wouldn't be. I actually would highly suggest you do read Konkin. And I'm not saying this to make you an agorist. It's also really short reading. And I think there's a reason why there's been an insurgence of agorism. And I think it's because of the time that we're living in right now and the shit that's going on. And how a lot of it's between the public-private shit and like that type stuff. And Konkin had a lot to contribute to there. And he actually, I think in a lot of ways was just expanding a lot of what Rothbard said, but he kind of emphasized certain things a little bit more that Rothbard probably didn't have the benefit of his time in history of, emphasizing as much, because he totally touched on, and even in Anatomy of State, me and Dave talked about it. He actually touched on this a little bit. Rothbard did. I don't feel like he ever emphasized it nearly as much as Konkin did. And I actually think there's a reason why there's this emphasis now, where the public is they're merging the public and private with fascism and stuff, and that's a thing that's going on now. So I would highly suggest everyone read it. There's a reason why it's surging popularity. It's not me saying to be an agorist. I wish Dave Smith would read it. I'm not saying he hasn't. I mean, I don't think he has, but it literally would probably take you a day or two, especially if you're a big reader. You could read both Konkin's books, Agorist Primer and New Libertarian Manifesto in like a day easily, and especially if you're a big reader. And I think it has a lot to add to our current situation. So even if you are going to engage in politics, just even for having a proper rhetoric to deal with today's situation, I think Konkin has a lot to offer. And so I think especially you need to get Maddie. You need to get Maddie to read it, because literally everything he's fucking describing is it's so much dude, read it. You're touching on all the same shit Konkin's touching on, all of it. Just he's coming from from a different way. And
he's coming at it from more NRX perspective.
Yes. And dude.
I'm saying that as I understand agorism to be, which is, it's all secondary material, obviously, that I've gotten it through. But I've always been friendly to the agorist idea, because
it's basically wealth, power, and influence, but try your best to kind of sort of keep your shit outside the state. And it's not a 0 and 1. It's very much just another thing I think Konkin has to offer modern day is he doesn't operate in a binary sense. And that's why a lot of people make fun of agorists, you wear seatbelts, or some dumb shit like that. You're not really an agorist. I'm like, well, then you obviously don't understand agorism. Agorism is inherently along the line of he's not saying go live in the woods and go return to monk and not pay taxes. He's saying push it as far as you can without getting in trouble to whatever extent you're comfortable with.
Yeah, that's something I always universally agree with.
Yeah. That's all he's saying. If you don't have to claim the taxes, why the fuck would you? And even then, furthermore, maybe think about what is the cost of if I get caught for he legit in the New Libertarian Manifesto has a calculation for how to determine, like, you know, if the risk outweighs it. And a lot of people don't think of it in that way. They just think of it as it's illegal. It's like, okay, yeah, it's illegal, but what is the fine?
Right.
And how much money are you? How much profit do you have to make off this? Does the profit outweigh the cost? I don't know.
Yeah. He essentially just takes all the laws and turns them into economic values. Like, okay, what is the economic value of this law, and what is the economic cost to breaking this law, and and do I come out with a profit at the other end of?
Yeah, and you multiply them by the appropriate probabilities, and then you get your answer. Is the expected value positive? Do it. If it's negative, don't.
Exactly.
Right.
And that's all it really is. And everyone makes it out like this dumb, like, oh, we're just gonna go live out in the woods and grow potatoes and fucking sell guns or some shit. It's like, no, like, I mean, it's different for everyone. It's really literally all it's saying is, like, disregard the law, but don't get in trouble and push it to the furthest extent possible.
It's an action, not an ideology.
Huh?
Agreed.
It's an action, not an ideology.
Yeah. I mean, it is kind of an ideology also too, but like, yeah, I mean, but it's what it's describing. And so that's basically wealth, power, and influence. Because I would actually advocate that is the best wealth, power, and influence. Because if you can set up your wealth, because I mean, he very much pushes having multiple revenue streams, setting yourself up outside the state, but not to the point you get in trouble. I mean, that is literally a recipe for success. Like, shit, that's what, like, major corporations already do. Like,
exactly.
Like, no shit. Like, that's all it is. People make it this, like, way more thing than it has to be. But we're kind of rambling here, and you got me rambling on fucking agorism.
Well, but I'm understanding it. It still sounds coherent to me. So.
Yeah, no, I would highly suggest reading it. Like, it's really not anyone out there. He has so much to offer to today's discussion, and I think that a lot of people really need to read. Even if you don't want to be like, hey, I don't want to. Even if you want to interact in politics, he's a lot to say.
Yeah.
So I mean,
and Konkin even admits that, you know, the state or the people who want to coerce others will never go away, right? So he's very realistic about this. He's
Yeah, and a lot of what I've described too in New Libertarian Manifesto, I like a lot of what I've said about what I see about the future. I feel like Konkin sort of predicted in some sense. So, like, basically his rise of the Agora is kind of like describes history in a sense, and so I think you would have a lot to gain from that, Andrew. But yeah, anyways, I guess we're getting kind of. Do you have anything else you guys want to add? Because we are getting along the tooth here. We've gone for a good while. But Ace, do you have any other further critiques?
No, I think I'm good. I just want my main point going into this is I really just wanted to like learn how you defined what the words you were using, and I feel like I got that, so I'm pretty happy with this.
Yeah, which I think that was important too. Bring that up. That's major. Like I said before, like I mostly just had semantic disagreements or things maybe you should put different emphasis on. Really, I actually do think Archotropism is a valuable theory, and I think it's interesting, and that's part of why I want to like make sure you're maximizing it to the furthest extent. So if we can provide whatever semantic little nitpick critiques, I think it'll only strengthen it. So yeah, I mean, whether you take that advice or not, I mean, I don't know. I mean,
I definitely will read Konkin. I have a mountain of books that I'm having to get to, but it definitely will be added to the list.
Have you ever read any of the post-anarchists by any chance, or post-anarchism?
No, I have not. I don't. No.
Okay, it's essentially, it dovetails very well with agorism, but it's essentially the idea that the state will always exist, and essentially, like, distilled down like very, very loosely, it's essentially this idea that you just have to treat the state and these other things like externalities, like the same way you would like some hurricane coming at you. You just have to take the necessary preparations and then work within that to the best of your ability.
Yeah, it was Stirner was considered a post-anarchist, right?
Yeah.
So he's very much, I mean, he's probably the only one I've really read in that regard.
Okay.
Yeah, and this is a kind of where I say, okay, it's a force of nature. Let's just deal with it appropriately.
Right.
And and I think this is where we start talking about what's appropriate, and that's the conversation we just had.
Right. Okay.
And the LP is not appropriate, so we all agree, right?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I agree. I know, Ace. You
I do agree. I think like everything, like I used to have this belief that we're gonna have the LP can be used as like a bully pulpit where we can spread the message. But then again, I thought, well, wait a minute, why wouldn't you be able to do that as a Republican or Democrat in some sense? If that's what you were going to do in the first place, why wouldn't you jump on board with the place with more numbers, right? The party with more people to hear the message. There is
something too. I think utilizing the political system. If you're an anarchist and you want an anarchist society, I think that's. I mean, I know you can make a legit argument, but it's also a matter of perception. So if your end goal is anarchism and the people you're trying to get there, if they have a certain perception, I think it kind of corrupts the message to some extent if you're using that platform.
If you think of the Overton window being on the real high time preference side, maybe we should just bring that up, try to use that bullet hole to bring the Overton window down to the lower time preference for power, because that moves it closer to us.
And I also don't see any even ethical reason against sabotaging the system from within. I think that's a perfectly legitimate strategy.
Yeah, I have no ethical issues. This is why I diverge from a lot of agorists, where they will make moral arguments against political involvement, and I'm like, I know for me that's that just ain't it, Chief. But I mean, I will try my best to I mean, not necessarily I guess try my best I'm standing for it, but I come from a perspective I don't think it works out in the long run. I mean, you the high time preference, low preference. I think you're if you're working within the state, you're to some extent kind of building it up, and I think you're going to fuck yourself over in the long run. I think you maybe have better short-term gains. I think you can get short-term gains from politics, and then people look at that and go, well, look at this fucking short-term game. And you're like, well, but look at the course of history.
I think as long as you're focused on, your ultimate goal, you have an ultimate goal in mind, that's then you're not going to fall prey to it. But if you're kind of just this issue or that issue, and you're kind of aimless, I think you're eventually you will end up becoming cringe.
But even on that though, but what we're talking about here is stuff that's going to take generations. If we're
I don't think so. I think the privatization, I think that's doable to almost today. If the only thing standing in our way is lack of money or poverty.
I mean, I guess I hope you're right.
Stop being poor first, but I think it's that idea is very achievable.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I just see as a whole if you're looking at liberty as this large thing where people increasing liberty, it is kind of I think it's more of a generations game. And also, I mean, even then, I think increasing yourself on individual level to kind of go back to agorism, I think that kind of is the best way to help yourself individually. And I think if you make better yourself individually, I think it kind of spreads out from there. I mean, we always go about how we're individualists, but I think that's the best way to move things individually.
And speaking of agorism and also the crypto anarchists, if you just think of what Cody Wilson did with the 3D printing of guns, right? What he started with that right there is it's a political action, but it's not from the political system. You know what I mean? So it creates an increased amount of cost to enforcing gun control laws. So there are certainly so I'm not saying you're wrong, but I do think there are certainly a lot of avenues where you can attack the state and increase the cost of their enforcement from outside of it.
Oh, that's my exact prescription of archotropism, is because if you have this incentive, the way to turn off the incentives is to make a higher disincentive. Yeah. So in other words, if the problem is aggression is profitable, well, okay, the solution is make aggression a loss.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, that's exactly. So it's I would 100% agree with that. And, it's kind of really difficult to do, and technology certainly helps. But if you have to be able to turn their profits into a loss, that will collapse the state, because that collapses the hierarchy for the value of that action. So that is, I mean, I would with the archotropism framework, I 100% on board with the agorists and their theories and their practices.
Okay, yeah.
I've always said, okay, there's at least two solutions that come out of the archotropism framework. One is the GOP solution, where you're working from within the state, to move the Overton window closer to our time preference for power. The other is, going at the incentives directly, and you can do that either through the state or through agorism or counter economics.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're just fucking get this is where it's always this where it starts getting fun, when you start breaking up. But fucking, you guys want to go ahead and drop your plugs?
Ace, go ahead.
Oh, okay. You can find me on Twitter at ace_archist, and I'll often be debating 12 follower accounts, and you can find me there. Yeah.
And keep an eye out for Ace. I don't know when we haven't got it scheduled yet, but he is going to be my dude covering Benjamin Tucker for this Anarchist Handbook series I got, which I don't know. I feel like I've struck gold. I've got a lot of good guests. I have Thaddeus Russell coming up. I'm recording with him on Friday, and he's doing Emma Goldman. And I don't know. Cool. I'm trying my best to, when I pick these people, people exude these people. And I don't know why, something about, like, for example, Dave Smith was Murray Rothbard. Magnus was Sterner. Magnus Pinvidia. You Tucker. It's gonna be
Tucker's my favorite anarchist.
Yeah. So, and then for fucking then I just said Goldman for Thad.
Yeah.
And like Thad's also a historian, and I feel like Emma Goldman's really biggest thing, while she was a good intellectual, their biggest contribution was historically. So that'll be interesting. I'm really looking forward to that. Probably attacking from a historical way. Go ahead, Pops.
I'm Popular Liberty underscore on Twitter, and you can find me on YouTube at just Popular Space Liberty. You can find all my content there, and I just did a new Archotropism video on the implications of the fourth law, which is the one that says, hey, geopolitics and geography matter. And and I was analyzing a potential war with China and reasons why I thought that was not going to happen based on their population demography, their actual war capabilities, et cetera, et cetera. And I think this would be something that a lot of people would, who are interested in the Archotropism framework, this would be and its implications. That'd be a video I think you should definitely look into. Or it's also available on Spotify.
Yeah, I highly suggest going check that out. Guys, really appreciate you guys coming on. That was a loud ding, whoever that was.
I'm so sorry. That was my phone.
You're good. This isn't professional here. I'm not monetized. I don't give a shit. This has been No Way Jose. I'm Jose Galisan. If you like my shit, check me out on YouTube. Check me out on fucking all the major podcatchers. Give me money, patreon.com/NoWayJose2020. That way you can see this stuff early. I usually wait like a week before I drop an episode unless it's something super current or if I just can't wait. Like, share, subscribe, all that gay shit. And with that, we are out.
Take care, guys.